G'day friends and fans, and welcome to Dave Talks Off Ukraine War Update for the 28th of October 2025. Wow, there's a lot of news today, but a lot of it are repeat stories. Now, the media repeats stories all the time. We just don't normally see with something on this scale. But in the last 2 hours, we've had repeats about stories that happened during the week from Belarus and Lithuania exchanging words, the Nordic leaders, particularly Finland, having a meltdown over Russia again. Gee, Sweden, fix your own backyard first, okay? They're another one having a meltdown, of course. But Finland's having a meltdown because they're trying to scare America into putting more bases in Finland because Finland makes money off these bases. They are trying to bleed you of tax money. They're trying to portray Russia as a bigger threat. But remember, World War I, the more they hyped up the threat about a war between Germany and France as destroying Europe forever, the more the British public got scared about Germany and created an unnecessary war, which instead of being over in 30 days when France sued for peace, because Britain told them to, Instead of entering the war, would have been over. France would have been humiliated, but the British, however, didn't want Germany to occupy or salvage the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. They wanted to see them crumble because they're competitors to the mighty British. And they also wanted to see a defeat of Germany because Germany had a big navy and didn't want to threat to their naval power. This is the problem. Everybody's talking about threats. But if you're the big guy, you're a threat to everybody else. It's like school all over again, where the little guy's running around beating on the tallest person in the room so that nobody else will pick on them. Well, nobody was thinking about picking on you. You're just being paranoid. But that's throughout history. People being paranoid have created wars. Ursula von der Leyen, another unelected EU bureaucrats, getting more airtime repeating the same stories they've had since they've come to office. Russia the boogeyman. Does Russia spy on us? Yes. Do we spy on them? Yes. Do they steal technology? Yes. So does China. So does Korea. So does the biggest thieves are actually not the Russian spies. Believe it or not, they're Chinese, Indians, and Israelis who routinely go to colleges, drop millions of dollars, get to fund research projects, and then get to take them off the people who actually created them, go home, and then claim to have invented them. This has been going on for a long time, Steve Jobs, where the government takes projects off other companies because they're either falling behind or they lack confidence in them, and they give them to someone else. Steve Jobs. Now this is happening more and more, and you were warned to stop doing this a long time ago. It's now been done to you by other countries, and instead of dealing with them, you're taking out your angers and frustrations on Russia. Europe falling behind is taking out their anger and frustrations on Russia instead of uniting with them, because that would be paramount to treason to the communist cause. And that communist cause, of course, is to punish anybody who dares leave communism. Well, Europe is becoming the USSR before our very eyes, and if you say otherwise in Europe, you go to jail. You dare question Keir Starmer's policy on crime, or that a Muslim woman is protecting Muslims from Islamophobia, when most people are saying they're the ones committing the crimes. Even pointing out a criminal is a Muslim in England is now a crime of Islamophobia and can get you in jail for 10 years. Even though there doesn't seem to be any Pacific law broken. Oh, that's right. Hate crime. Hate speech. It's what happens when you don't have a Bill of Rights. Courts that uphold them. And of course, America's full of courts that don't uphold the law or the impartiality of the law. And you have biased juries putting white people away forever while letting black people go. It is insanity all around. Why? Well, I'm getting off track, but I'm just pointing out the absurdities of hypocrisy. And it is hypocrisy of politicians and the politically motivated to drive nations to war. Yet there's a chance. Now the thing is, this only appeared on my feed just as I was getting ready to go to record. Now, there's no confirmation or mainstream story. In fact, when I was going through Google Trends and other sites for news stories on Ukraine, this wasn't listed. This is unusual. The story appeared 14 minutes ago, live as I was recording, right? It's updated. So, while Zelensky was either in London or Poland, we cannot confirm his location, okay, but he's not in Kiev, allegedly. Now, this is a file photo from Shutterstock. This is actually taken a few years ago. It's when he remembered to use. It's when he could afford Just for Men, you know. Although he's starting to show his grey and his age lines, he's put on a bit of weight since then. So, now the Ukrainian president allegedly had talks with a journalist, though the journalist here is allegedly 2 hours ago. Does not appear to be the interviewee. But then again, it could be just the way they've written it and not actually put it. But it looks like what's really happened is that Catherine, editor-in-chief of The Guardian, got a publicity statement from Zelensky politicized it, then gave it to Jakub to turn into an interview. I don't think there was an actual interview or an actual talk. I think they merely got the article off, and of course it's disappearing. It's been updated again, obviously. Well, I'm not going in it. The key takeaway is the Ukrainian president has seemed to have put out a presser where he has said that Kiev was ready for peace talks. He noted that this would be anywhere but Russia and Belarus Belarus. Okay, this is a response to Putin's repeated calls for peace talks. Han actually has offered to host them several times. This is after the refusal of Zelensky to go to Ankara to talk with the Russian delegation because Putin wasn't there. And Putin said he will not leave Russia and since then he has left Russia. Now, this is because there were threats by Zelensky's agents, not Zelensky himself, but Zelensky's agents, that we will get him anywhere, anytime. And in fact have tried to kill Putin with drones before in Moscow. This threat, of course, was what they think would end the war. No, if they kill Putin, the next guy comes in will just unload on Ukraine and will be very merciless with Ukraine. Ukraine seems to not think, and remember, historically, killing the leader of another country rarely ends wars. It tends to escalate them into violence. It's one of the reasons why they, always glorified resistance, but in the end, we see that all it does is escalate the next government to be even more vicious than the previous. A passive resistance, even today, passive resistance. Look at the American, the left always glorified themselves as passive resistance to fascism. Yet around the world, fascism is rising because fascism is on the left. The American left are just very good at gaslighting the swing voter who just doesn't seem to care about politics. But politics, of course, is an evil in itself. And by ignoring politics and ignoring the consequences of left-wing governments, you end up with wars like this, where the Eurofash has to expand because their economy cannot grow. They've destroyed it, right? They can't figure out that you have to cut spending to grow the economy. They can't figure out that subsidizing healthcare is what made healthcare expensive for anybody else, and is why there's more people than ever cannot afford healthcare, because you keep taxing the successful people to fund the poor people, and the poor people just keep using more healthcare instead of taking better care of their health. So you end up with mass consumerism. You have people who go, I feel anxious today, and they take pills. People who feel nervous and they go to, and you have people who go to therapy day after day after day, call their therapists, racking up hundreds of dollars in therapy bills. It's fine when it's their own money, but subsidized healthcare just runs, but the more and more university jobs, that's all they care about, right? More money for the university. Everybody's just trying to find a way to get more, even Zelensky. But if Zelensky is genuinely open for talks, I don't know why other outlets aren't reporting this. Yeah, it's now updated. They changed it from 2 to 3 as we're speaking. But it has not changed the fact. Yeah. Change the facts of the war. And the fact remains, Ukraine constantly accuses Russia of only killing civilians. Russians have advanced in several areas on multiple fronts. But Al Jazeera adds this, cannot be independently verified because you're not in Ukraine, nor is most reporters. Okay, most reporters, including The Guardian, that's why I brought it up, that's why I use it, they're all using filed presses, from the Ukrainian intelligence service. Every day they pump out hundreds of stories, pro-Ukrainian stories. Most of them don't get put up. The Kyiv Independent just cycles through, imaginary victories, well, we stopped the Russians here, but there's no reported fighting. There's it's a huge front, by the way. You would think there would be a lot more fighting reported. But a lot of the fighting isn't verified or independent, like the time they claimed they liberated a town that wasn't even taken by Russians. Now, on the diplomatic front, Donald Trump has spoken about his Russian counterpart, that he should be ending the war instead of testing nuclear-powered missiles. This is referring to the missile test yesterday, adding that Washington has a nuclear submarine off the Russian coast and does not need long-range missiles, missiles with 4,000 miles range, you know what I mean? Oh, sorry, 14,000. Yeah, but... And actually note that this comes after the test of the Revesnik missile. Gosh. You think by now I can pronounce these Russian words better. Because somebody will... One day I will, and they say, see, that's proof he's a Russian bot. It's amazing what the NPCs will come up with to try and justify their hatred of anybody who dares speak the truth. See, the left aren't interested in the truth, folks. They're only interested in confirmation of their bias. Now, most Republicans are interested in the truth, so they can make informed decisions. The problem is, how do you identify the truth, even when multiple sources are lying to you? Well, now and again, you do find cracks in their narratives and find evidence that they are lying beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is, you take all the stories about two impeachments of Trump, impeachment proceedings that, by a Democrat, is not proof, right? He was found not guilty right? He wasn't impeached. They had impeachment proceedings. It's like, oh yes, my enemies persecuted me, Same with the 34 felonies from a bookkeeping misdemeanor that is a common a common crime in New York because it's a subjective law. Okay, if they think you wrote the wrong entry in a ledger, they can charge you with a misdemeanor. How's it exploded into a felony? Oh, they say, but the amount's over $100,000, therefore it's a felony. But it's not a taxable amount. It was an expense recorded against his personal expenses, but they say it was a campaign violation. See, this is how politics infects everything. And when you start to see, right, the same pattern by the same people sprouting hyperbolic attacks on Trump, on Russia, and then you go, right, if these newspapers go on about the Russian collusion hoax, the 2020 election, keep bringing up January 6th, you're going to say, well, they're not reliable sources because they believe in hoaxes, and they can't tell fact from fiction. So you can't say they're a reliable source for facts. So even Al Jazeera is starting to crack. And we're running out of news sources, reliable news sources, because the people in the news media only care about politics. Because they think that by going with the political narrative of the left, they will get their job for life and they'll be paid a small fortune to sit at a desk, not do real work, and be exempt from war. And be considered part of the elite class. They get invited to all the right shows, all the right art galleries, all the right parties, all the right after parties. They get access to celebrities, and they too might have a chance of getting laid by Diddy. And that's all they care about. They don't care about the people. Those are just glib words to sell newspapers. And it worked for CBS Radio, it worked for RKO, it worked for ABC for a very long time. But eventually, people broke through and started to see they were lying. But it's taking over a century in some cases to realise how much lies. The media for centuries lied about the mafia. They claimed the mafia didn't exist. The media have lied about wars, always claiming some noble cause. That, when in reality, France declared war in 1914 on Germany because they said the German troops went into Serbia to put down riots. That was an unnecessary use of force. No, it wasn't. Turned out the riots were started by British and French intelligence working together to undermine the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And then France didn't want their agents discovered. So they had a hissy fit to cover up their interference in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. World War II. Russia and Germany invaded Poland. The von Ribbentrop Agreement, which most countries don't even seem to teach about anymore. The Russian Revolution started in Ukraine, was not a spontaneous uprising. It was decades of left-wingers over and over again, all across Eastern Europe and parts of Europe since 1883, causing riots. But the riots in Ukraine spread, and returning soldiers, finding that all the factories were closed and all these things were closed, they didn't stop to think that the left jobs is what closed the factories. That the left shutting down the railway and burning the farmers' markets are what caused the food shortages. It was the left, and this caused a rift in the left and created this new left, right? This new National Socialism promised to protect everybody from the communists. But the communists already had swept through Russia and parts of Eastern Europe, and Germany was legitimately worried. Now, Germany had come to a peaceful agreement with Russia, which ended up in the partitioning of Poland. But the British didn't paint it that way. They painted it as some barbaric invasion based on a lie, which we cannot confirm or deny. We don't know if the Dutch communist who burnt down the Reichstag was a protester or a paid agitator, because he died in the fire. We do know that Nazi Germany turned into a horrific monster, and was likely always a horrific monster. But it didn't have to be that way. In 1924, the Americans abandoned Germany and their promises on Germany. In 1936, the Americans had the chance again to stop the rise of Nazism. They chose not to, because Roosevelt, the newly elected president, Roosevelt, was in secret alliance with the Russians, planning war, and started building warships. So the cracks in Ukraine. This is why I believe it's so important to study, looking for the cracks. And the cracks in the Ukraine story go back to the 2014 coup, and you find out it was funded by Obama through the Open Society Foundation. And at the time, I had no idea how many coups the CIA had instigated. But colour revolutions by NGOs, 74. Regime changes, which he started with the picking of winners and losers in European elections in 1947 through to 1958 under Dahl's direct intervention in the outcome of elections to make sure that only the right-minded people won elections. And you don't think they did that in the United States? You don't think they did this in Ukraine? There was a secret war in Ukraine, but most people don't know about. There's also you keep hearing about the Jews being rounded up, but they never tell you about the Christians that were rounded up, or the gypsies, or anybody else who was rounded up by the Russians or by the Germans. Both sides were equally vile. And then, of course, Ukraine from 1958 to 1991 was communist. And millions died under that regime. But, the so-called spash to fash, I was very silent on that. Now, for Hungary, who knows very well the bitter taste of communist oppression, particularly by Ukrainian troops, as Ukraine was a very willing taskmaster for the Russians in the USSR and helped occupy the Eastern Europe as well as Belarusia, which is why they're not very welcome. Both of them weren't very welcome after 1991 in Europe, and Belarusia voted to remain part of the Russian Federation, whereas Ukraine wanted to be an independent country, and they declared neutrality. Everybody was happy with that. But then came Obama and ruined all that. And since then, Hungary's been in a very consistent message. A neutral Ukraine is beneficial to us all. So was Russian oil. Europe wasn't dependent on Russian oil. Russia was dependent on European currency. Trump made a mistake. Biden made the same mistake. Many have made that mistake. Nobody seems to understand that when Russia was dependent on trade with Europe to stay afloat, they couldn't afford their war machine. It's only when India stepped in and India and China stepping in, giving Russia a $100 million boost and pushing them to retaliate in Ukraine, did Russia go to war. And that's 10 years after not 10 years. 8 years? After the coup? 2022. Nearly 10 years of war. Okay? Which should have been a UN priority, which it hasn't been. Because the UN does not care about Ukraine. They want Ukraine to kill more white people. Most of the UN are not white, remember? They hate us. Most of the countries around the world should just be isolated, allowed to fester and die. They don't care about us. They have nothing but contempt for us. They have nothing but hatred for us. They're not peaceful countries. Nothing we do, okay? These people do not respond to our kindness with kindness. They respond to our kindness with contempt. They see our kindness as weakness. And the left love to exploit that kindness so they can spread more leftism. Countries need to be allowed to be left and left alone so they can fester and collapse on their own. And as more countries are allowed to fester and collapse, but the left keeps saying, you just let people die. Yes, it's called the consequences of your actions. Why should I save your life when you're only going to stab me in the back with authoritarianism? You have to learn the consequences of socialism. And until that consequence is burnt deep into your bones. And right now, a lot of Russians have said, right, if Putin makes a wrong step, he's out. And so far, right, it's up to them, not us. Because if we interfere in Russia, all it does is reinforce Russian fears of Western aggression. You have to understand, your motives mean nothing to other people. Other people, you have to understand how they see your actions. They don't see your motives. They know that people lie. Okay, they see politicians' lips move and they say, yes, politicians lie. That's why they say to Putin, we don't care what you say. It's the results. If the results go against us, you're out. That's the same thing, I think, with Trump, Orban, even Macron. Macron's supporters right now are considering outing Macron because he just cannot create a stable government that will get through to the next election. So they're saying, either we have an election or you find a compromise that breaks the stalemate. And the left and the right have no incentive to work with Macron because he's betrayed them both in the past. And the Greens, who are the only ones supporting Macron right now, are only doing so because it's the only way they can stay in office. Because if they work with any other party, they're instantly seen as traitors to the cause and will be ousted and won't never win an election again. And all of them support. All of this is causing regional instability, and regional instability is what's keeping the Ukraine war going. It's also the weapons supply, because now, according to Ukraine's military intelligence, who cannot be trusted, they claim the list of origins of Russian electronics come from 68 foreign components. Well, this is Russian drones and missiles. Japan, Korea, Netherlands, etc. All bought on the open market, right? These drones recently were... there's a US study that says that this is actually wrong. These are not coming from Japan, or the Netherlands, or South Korea, or Switzerland, or Taiwan, or the United Kingdom, or the US. They're coming from companies all in China and or India. And that India is supplying drones to Iran and Russia for assembly. So China, Russia has a domestic drone market, but there are key components that they cannot produce. The Netherlands, again, those chips are not shipping anything, nor is South Korea or Switzerland or Taiwan. People for the last 2 years have been totally misled by Ukraine's military intelligence. And I'm telling you right now, you can take a bit of time to actually look up and try and find these companies, and you'll find, particularly with the Netherlands, their biggest chip manufacturer is partially owned by China, controlled by China, and mostly is in China, and right now is trying to oust their China for using their company's... I think it's called a lithographic machine. You know, the machine that produces fancy coloured lights that etches photo etches circuit boards. Those circuit boards for remote control cars and helicopters are also the same remote controls that get shipped to Russia. It's not the Netherlands, and it's not sourced in the Netherlands. It takes time. But Ukrainian military intelligence, who's supposed to do this research, don't. They produce propaganda to create more fear, to bully companies into going, no, the Netherlands doesn't support Russia. Here's more money. See? We prove we are against Russia. See what a shakedown this is? But it's not working, by the way. Now, there was allegedly an attack by a glide bomb. It was shot down. And, yeah. But for some reason, shut down over Kryvyi. For some reason, they cannot. Yeah. Ukrainian military intelligence says it destroyed with drones. They show the drone footage, but there's no video. And from the Russian side, yeah, Russia with drones, they claim, oh wait, there, boom, starts to play and then dies. Okay. There's a Russian news story about a fire it's in Russian. There was a fire here in the town, near the airport, where a drone was shot down. How did it destroy a boat when it's near the airport? Does Ukraine not know the difference between a boat and an airplane? You say you destroyed an airplane, yet you put the marker on an airport, a boat, in a fishing village, and a house nearby. There was a drone. It was shot down. Debris set fire to a house near the airport. People were hurt. Ukraine is putting out propaganda. Now again, blackouts are reported due to ongoing problems with the Ukrainian power grid. Now, I don't know how a fire in, Chapter 4 plant in Kiev, why the control center being offline there affects other parts of Ukraine, but apparently it's what they call an oversupply reactor. That is, the Ukrainian power grid has more supply in some areas than others, and what they do is they shift the oversupply. When they don't need it, it becomes what they call oversupply, right? But in the industrial area, when industry doesn't need the excess power, it's shunted to other areas. So why don't they just why wouldn't they then just put reactors where it's needed and then shunt the extra power of those to Kiev? But that's because Kiev is the fortress. The other areas are left open to be sacrificed as targets, because it's cheaper to rebuild the power lines there than to rebuild the power stations. These aren't real power plants. They're just supplied power from the oversupply in Kiev. They're power distribution nodes, not power plants. They're big transformers, but they're hidden inside big concrete buildings to make it look like they're actually a power station. Now, some of them do actually have diesel generators and gas plants, but the Ukrainian power grid doesn't supply the next town. It's scattered so that you couldn't logically work out which power station supplies what towns. But Russia, in the years of war and hitting targets, see where the lights go out, and knew that by hitting the Chapter 4 control room in Kiev, it would shut down the industrial center in another area, just past Vinny over here. So, between the two. So they did that, rather ingenious, right? Where you thought initially, it does seem genius on paper that, you have 9 reactors, but no, you actually have 4 in Kiev and a few scattered around the country, and they provide Ukraine with 150% power. So when one reactor's off, and for maintenance, you always have another able to turn on, and they can clean and scrub and take their time to really do some proper maintenance. So Ukraine allegedly has more power than it needs at any one time, but it doesn't keep the reactors on always, because you have to shut them down regularly for cleaning, maintenance, replace top up coolant, check for cracks, leaks, check the radiation levels, make sure the power rods are working properly, all that sort of stuff. That takes time. So you need more power, right? You need another power station. So you've got one power station, you actually need 2. So you can shut some reactors down while you're working on them and turn others on. And then you can leave the others to cool and for the radiation to disperse so that you can have a proper control mechanism. Seems reasonable. But Russia worked out the pattern, right, of all their distribution nodes. And now Ukraine doesn't know what to do. Because distribution nodes are like, you've ever seen a transformer park? They're actually multiple city blocks size. They're actually huge transformers with cables coming in. Now, normally you think, well, wouldn't Russia just trace the cables? Yeah, but the cables in Ukraine, a lot of them are underground. Ukraine was built with a wartime mentality long ago, when Russia was using Ukraine as a buffer against the West and using Ukraine troops occupying Poland and Romania and Hungary, etc., on the Austrian border here, to basically be a tripwire, and that the Russian troops were actually here in Rostov. There weren't that many Russians in Ukraine, though the Russian troops in Ukraine actually came from the Donbass. See, it's what they don't tell you. So these people here were the bulk of the Ukrainian army, which is why they were kicking the Ukrainian army out for a while. But as they were running out of ammunition and medical supplies and Western intervention, they were pushed back. And that's eventually when Russia kicked in, saying, look, if you're going to have Western intervention, we're going to intervene, And it comes down to anything you can do, they can do. Now, Ukraine's attacked a town in... which one's this? Kursk, and fighting along the Kursk buffer. Again, Sumi's hit. More fighting in the Kharkiv buffer zone. Looks like there's a little bit of movement, but nothing really consequential yet. But it looks like they are expanding the buffer zone. Same here. It looks like they're filling in the buffer zone here. No fighting in Kupiansk reported, but fighting elsewhere is reported. There's a little bit of fighting in the Lyman area. A little bit of the Russians have advanced north of Zak. Whoops. Zak. but they haven't further advanced in Zak itself, and they haven't actually gone towards Lyman. They just filled in this area here a bit more. Same as they've taken a little bit here and here, but that's still fighting on the outskirts of Seversk, but they've now got a foothold on the outskirts of Seversk and other areas. They're tightening the noose on the eastern front, fighting here, fighting here, fighting in Chevy Yar after months of silence. The Ukrainians here obviously trying to push back their Russian counterparts here. Now, Russia's progressed towards Konsk on multiple fronts now. They're here. They've taken more territory here as they expand and dig in on the outskirts of Konsk. They're expanding their foothold in the south. They haven't made much progress here. A little bit here and there. Taken some territory north of Roddy. Expanded on Nova. Increased the number of incursions into Myro. They've taken more territory to the east here, pushing out the last of the Ukrainians here on the outskirts of Myro's satellites. They're still fighting here over the eastern gateway, I suppose, to POC, and its satellites still haven't completely fallen, but the Russians have increased their hold on the western and southern parts of Posk, and they pretty much control the rail line now into Posk, and clashes over the rail line and surrounding areas. Same with clashes over the main junction. Well, there's two key junctions that access the middle of Posk, the main city here, but the Russians are fighting on the outskirts of the center of Posk, or actually that would be the center of Posk proper, but Posk doesn't only refer to everything from here to here. Sabanitsk and this is also all of Posk. Remember, Ukraine was designed to confuse the enemy by having two names for more than one name, okay? Areas sometimes had the same name as their city. Some cities, you'll find multiple towns with the same name across Ukraine. But, okay, Russians have taken more territory, expanded only a little bit in the so far in the west, still fighting over some of the same areas in the west. Despite the Ukrainian counteroffensive that pushed the Russians back, the Russians are still here fighting. They haven't been pushed further back, and the Russians have gone past the Ukrainians and attacking their supply lines. And they're increasing their foothold here in the, as well as multiple attacks across. And as I said, Russia's building towards, as I said yesterday, it's clear now. They're going to siege Tupi over here. Although they've been sieging Orsk for years now. And they're still fighting over the road to Zaporozhye. Now and again, the Russians do break through to Zaporozhye, by the way. They do actually sometimes control the entire road. The Ukrainians often retreat to Orsk or Khermovskia. But the Ukrainians are on the north side of Zaporozhye. There's rarely any fighting in Zaporozhye. Most of it's actually artillery bombardments from here to the Russians as they try to come through here. Same with here, they try to cut them off. It's a very confusing war at times. But Russian infiltrators, now Ukraine is loves to attack Donetsk. Russians love to attack Dnipro. It's tit for tat, I guess. Kryvyi again was hit with glide bombs. It's also one of the truck parks. Kherson, another tit for tat war, but it's usually one side of Kherson attacking the other side. Whereas whenever Ukraine attacks Donetsk, they attack Dnipro or Kryvyi or both. Same with the attacks here. Whenever they attack these guys up here, they'll attack Kharkiv, Sumy, or Kiev, or all three. It is a series of tit-for-tat wars. But the Cursed Bridge hasn't been touched in a long time. Ukrainian infiltrators have failed 9 times in the last month to get drone boats even into the water. They often don't make it. The Russians are more and more relying on helicopters, though. But in bad weather, they can sometimes fly Su-25s. But the thing is, in bad weather, shore batteries are able to get the drone boats. Although the drone boats sometimes head to Zerespol, etc. But if we don't always... There's also Russian patrol boats that we don't hear much about out of different ports that also take care of drone boats. Most of the naval warfare is very, very light or limited. The Russians mostly use their navy for launching missiles. They only do so about once a month. Most of the time they're air-launched, and they don't launch that many. Now, we have heard about threats to use the Omsk missile again. Russia hasn't. They're saving that, I guess, for a moment or two when Ukraine does something particularly nasty. When they attacked Putin in Moscow, they blew up the center of Dnipro, wasn't it? Or Kryvyi, one or the other. But in news that isn't being reported, apparently the Russians have destroyed a Ukraine training school in Ukraine. This hasn't been confirmed. It's only been reported by the Times of India. But they've rarely been wrong. But it's that one time they got a story wrong, but it was a different town name. Or later, Ukraine did retake the town, and Times of India still ran with the story knowing that Russia lost its hold on the town. There are times where the media can't keep up with the war because the stories are often 24 hours old before they even get to, and they often don't confirm what they're told, particularly with Western media like The Guardian, who want to appear bigger than they really are, so they make it look like they have exclusive access to Zelensky, when in fact they're just reading off the teletype, you know. But they are chasing their tail in Ukraine. Our top Hungarian diplomat has accused EU leaders of blocking peaceful attempts to settle Ukraine. So if Zelensky really wants peace and cannot say so in public, then he's good on him for trying to stick through and break through the noise and actually bring about peace. But I'm just saying, in the last couple of years, he's never made any... He's made promises of peace in... When was the election? When he made the promise, what, 2019? 2020? So, in his Man of the People speech, he did talk about peace. But he's never actually followed through on any of that. But if that's not his decision, but he remains there hoping to still bring about peace, I hope that's true. But I doubt it. I don't doubt Peter. So far the Hungarians have been proven right that it's mostly the French French and British trying to undermine President Donald Trump, and the French and British bullying Germany. And right now Germany's in such a mess that looks like they're bowing out, that they're just going to passively support Ukraine for now. but they're not taking any active measures other than approving whatever the EU tells them to approve. Now, Ukrainians were arrested in Poland on espionage charges, working for Kiev. Military logistics. Why would the Ukrainians be spying on military logistics and spying and collecting intelligence on the Polish military for Ukraine? Because they were preparing a false flag operation to blame Russia, to force Poland to declare war on Russia, and thus Europe declare war on Russia. So these Ukrainian nationalists, right? The reason is because they want to shut Poland up about Ukraine occupying Polish territory after the war, and that Ukraine had killed Poles during the war. And of course they don't want anything about Stefan Bandera, who was in Ukraine and killing non-Ukrainians up until 1958, and his secret deal with Canada and the US and other things. They don't want all this coming out. So they were trying to create a false flag, and I bet you they'll suddenly confess and reveal themselves to be Russian agents, so, to create even more mayhem and mischief, even though they're Ukrainian nationalists, members of the Ukrainian nationalist movement. They will sacrifice themselves for the name of Ukraine. Because that's what happens when you worship the state, not the people, or have love or loyalty for your people. Now, I don't like Lula, but Lula sometimes does something right. And when someone does something right, you give acknowledgement. Now, Lula has actually been mature about the Ukraine war and has been pretty consistent, rejecting Ukraine's requests for assistance, calling on them to find peaceful resolution. Now, saying that Moscow and Kiev have reached a point of maturity when both sides are calling for an end to the war. So that's a very good thing, and cannot be resolved overnight, but sit down and drawing a new border will take time. And in that time, there has to be a public discussion about Ukraine's ethnic cleansing, suppression of ethnic rights. Like, you'd imagine, right, if Trump banned Spanish tomorrow, there'd be riots in the US. But Ukraine banning Russian, EU, not a peep. The left in America, not a peep. That's why I say politics is cancer. Marxism is cancer. Leftism, liberalism, they're all cancer. Feminism is cancer. They are all cancerous tumours because it creates a tribalism, like Africans claiming to be Vikings. That's what politics does to the brain. It rots. There should be no politics, only truth. Now, Moscow has extended its hand to Trump's and is talking to the presidential aides about a time and place. There's no timetable, no venue yet. Trump has proposed, and both Hungary and Moscow are willing to participate. Right now, there has to be getting to a place where Trump feels there will be an actual achievement. It looks like Kiev and its Western backers, though reportedly calling for immediate ceasefire, have not taken steps to assure Russia that they will have a ceasefire and it's not just time to regroup its military, receive more arms, and receive trained soldiers that they desperately need. We get mixed signals over Russian oil from India. Now it seems two companies in China, one in India, are solely processing Russian oil, and those are the ones that are being sanctioned right now. They do operate under several names around the world, but so far the billions are still flowing to Russia in the forms of goods and services, except for trucks. Now you might ask, why are Chinese trucks not accepted in Russia? Well, it turns out Chinese trucks don't operate well in Russian winter, and Russia entering winter has cancelled further orders for Chinese trucks. But Russian trucks are being made in a Chinese-owned factory in Russia, but Russia has sent the Chinese workers home, saying that the Chinese workers were substandard, and have replaced them with Russian workers. So far, the Russians haven't taken completely, but it has caught the Chinese off guard, is a point of contention, but it also could be because China owes Russia a lot of money, and also that these Chinese workers may have actually been not producing trucks to Russian military standards. So there's going to be a lot of people saying different things. The truth is, Russia doesn't trust China. China has been very lax, very substandard, low productivity. And the only reason why China is so productive is that it has had such a cheap workforce. And a large, cheap workforce can produce a lot of cheap goods. Now, if you're buying a new phone every year, you're not going to notice it's crap after 3 years. If you're buying Chinese cars cheap, you tend to overlook the flaws. Tend to overlook that the colours aren't even, and you only notice the wipers don't work when it's raining. And most people don't go driving in the rain. So they start making excuses. But when you're the Russian military, you may not care if the paint's uneven, but you do care if the wipers don't work. You do care if the snow tyres actually can't grip the snow, right? Can't get traction. Or if the truck's too heavy and it sinks. Right? In winter, it's different, way different conditions when you're talking about the Russian winter, where it goes from 15 down to negative 15, you know what I mean? It swings that far sometimes. That a day could be actually warm, and at night it will literally freeze you to death. And if you're a truck driver, you need to be able to be warm in that truck, drive in that truck, and not crash that truck, because a Russian military truck, they tend to care that your deliveries are on time and intact. But so far, and I think everybody's acknowledged this, it'll take 6 months before Russia feels the sanctions. And they are targeted sanctions. And I think once they figure out which Chinese companies are providing parts for drones and how they're getting through the sanctions, watch what happens. Trump will just sign an EO. He'll show it off, package 20 or whatever they're going to call it. And Europe's... But the thing is, I think the reason why Trump hasn't signed it, because he knows they're not in the United States. They're in Europe. They're probably in Eastern Europe. And they're probably cross-border trade, probably where there's still cross-border trade. And I would be looking at Finland. Those who scream the loudest, Finland, Poland. Maybe it is in Hungary. I don't know. I'm just saying it wouldn't make sense for Russia to operate so boldly in the US, although they could be, although more likely, if it is Chinese exporters, they would be shipping them to China first or through China. Same when there was sanction busting in North Korea, they were shipping to Japan and smuggling to North Korea. All the same thing's probably going on. They're smuggling to a third-party country where law enforcement is not, or sanctions are not so broadly enforced and easier to bust. Now we know sanction busting goes on all the time in Turkey. Trucks pay thousands of dollars to cross the border. They pay off Turkish guards as well as Iranians. But organisations watching the border have noticed more and more Russian trucks. So there could be Russian sanction. That could also be a sort why Trump has pointed out the United States is not sanction busting, nor is North Korea or Japan, okay, nor is the Netherlands, okay, they're just components that go throughout Europe, throughout North Africa. Remember when also India, they've oddly left that out. India has huge overland routes into Russia and through China into Russia. Now, believe it or not, there are Pakistani companies that also ship to Russia and China. So there are multiple points where European parts are being shipped to third parties who are then shipping them to Russia. So they have to identify the parts. They can't just say, Ukraine intelligence said they come from the Netherlands. Yeah, okay, which company? Which organisation? Right? So sometimes you have like the Philips Group, right? And then within that group you have different companies, and they're not all in the Netherlands. You also have brands, right? You may say, oh, this brand is registered in the Netherlands, but it's not made there. See, this is the problem with global trade, is you can't just point to it says, oh, made in, unless it actually specifically says made in the Netherlands. And you don't get that, right? Most of it, other than maybe the CPU. But most boards don't even have a name on them anymore, because especially Chinese knockoffs. I think a lot of people are panicking though, but I don't think NATO is going to succeed. I think Lavrov is wasting his time complaining about NATO. NATO has its goals, Russia has its goals, EU has its goals, which are separate from NATO, because don't forget NATO includes other countries, not just Europe. UK has its goals. And right now, right, separate the noise. Do us what they do, right? You sit two sides down. Write your top 10 goals. Put them together. Find where they overlap. Put that onto another sheet of paper. Put it in the middle of the table. And then you go through the list of goals that both sides disagree on. And you say, you got 2, you got 2. Right. You 2 sort out A and B. You 2 over there, you sort out C and D. They get the people who could work together to go through the 4 to 6 goals that they can't agree on and find out which 3 on both, who gets what on both sides, what they could separate into where they can find a tolerable negotiating point across the board, and then they start filtering it through the various politicians. Then they have to start manufacturing consent. So whenever you hear leaks about peace talks, this is manufacturing consent. So right now, security guarantees are the manufacturing consent. Who's going to pay for them and how it's going to be enforced. From the Russian side, right? Trump, Russia is telling Trump they want to resolve the conflict based on what they said in Alaska. Without saying what they said in Alaska, Russia's saying NATO's activities in the Arctic are a bit concerning, but it can be peacefully negotiated. So as long as Finland keeps its nose out of Russian business, their little expeditions to the Arctic won't, and stick to their confined territories, Russia won't give a shit. Right? Finland, of course, wants more of the Arctic, particularly the Arctic route, and I just accidentally clicked something. I'm sorry. Right, here we go. NATO, of course, has put out that it wants to stake a place in the Pacific Ocean that upsets China. This is talking about the NATO base in either Korea and or Japan to help defend Taiwan. The United States is going to put a big line through that and say, that's a red line. We're not going there, man. So there are things, right, that are clearly indicating that Russia has been used by China as a battering ram on US foreign policy. Another sticking point for Russia is Macron and the French interfering in Ukraine. Of course, this is what France and Britain and Germany have done to make themselves feel better and feel powerful, and have done so for hundreds of years, and that is fuck with other countries' internal affairs by finding dissidents and funding them, providing them with intelligence, arms, and funding. But eventually it comes down to the point they want to send 2,000 soldiers to Ukraine. Ultimately, Russia knows that 2,000 turns into 20,000, turns into a permanent base, and suddenly there's 150,000 NATO troops on your doorstep. And again, they go through their manufacturing consent, telling Europe what they want because they won't listen. So they manufacture public talking points. Now, I'll leave you with just an idea how bad Ukraine is doing. Now, again, Russia is deliberately going slow because their aim is not to conquer, but to pressure. They want Ukraine to withdraw from the Donbass and surrender peacefully. They're not surrendering the entire country. But right now, Zelensky won't go to Parliament, won't put it to the people's vote, and that's the only way to end the war. If Zelensky was truly about peace, he would end the war. So here's what this ain't a satellite. This is what a country looks like from high up. Anybody who's travelled in a plane has probably seen similar scenes. So you know how high up this is. Now, they pinpoint the area that's been under attack. You can see it's not so green at close up. That's because wavelengths, the further you get away from the object, the further the wavelengths get. So it actually looks darker. The green looks darker as you get further away from it. And as you can see, several explosions, multiple explosions. It's how fast artillery barrages could go. See, they're showing up where they're heading. They precision strike on a Ukrainian bunker, right? They lined everything up, laser guided from overhead. The Ukrainians aren't shooting down the Russian drones. The Russians, with impunity, are attacking bunker after bunker. You can see the Ukrainians, the little holes in the ground, previous ones that have been hit or collapsed. You can see that's collapsed ground. You can see there what looks like a trench line. You can see previous impact bunkers. This time they've hit it. You can see proof that the Russians are in town. They get up on and hoist the flag. This is what a rocket artillery looks like at night. Just a streak on the screen. Of course, it's flash burned into the camera, but Sorry about that. Yeah, they were probably filming rocket artillery, and it's flash burned the LED. Or it could be reflection of light off the roof, but either way, it's burnt the LEDs in the camera. Now, unfortunately, I forgot. At the end, they show the dead Ukrainians. Totally unnecessary that they fought to the last man. I honestly don't know military doctrine in most countries. Probably they are online. I don't know. But as far as I know, Ukraine has been told no surrender. So they were following orders. And I thought the left say if orders are bad, disobey them. But Ukrainians are not allowed to surrender. If they try to surrender, they are shot. They are shelled by their second and third lines. But this is what happens when you support Ukraine. You're supporting Ukrainians fighting to their death, not to free their country, they're not going to free their country, they're not going to be remembered as heroes, they're not going to live to see their children, most of them won't have children. You're exterminating Ukraine. This is death by cop on a grand scale. Okay? Or that so you can beat your chest and say, we held back the Russia. See, this is the sophistry of politics. No matter the outcome of the war, the left will always claim some sort of victory and then claim Russia to be this big aggressor. This is the criminality of politics, where people support a cause in order to create political narratives, but they don't state them ahead of time. They want to shape the narrative at the end and claim that's always what they intended. That's why Zelensky always talks about peace, and why I don't trust him talking about peace, so that at the end he can shape the narrative and say, I was always about peace. But remember, you can go back 100 years, 200 years, and you'll see Ukraine's borders have changed often. And then you go back far enough, as Putin said, Ukraine didn't exist. It was created by the Russian Empire. Now, that doesn't mean it should belong to the Russians. I'm just saying, perhaps the part that was Russian should be returned to Russia, and the Russians in Ukraine get to decide which side of the border they live on, and whichever side of the border they live on, Ukraine is going to respect their rights as Ukrainian citizens if they stay, and not try to extinguish Russian history, Russian language, just because they had a spat. Okay? Nor exterminate your own crimes in history because you don't like what happened or it makes you look bad. Well, if it's like, you know, why is it the Nazis can never why is it always just about the Nazis? Why can't the communists wear the crimes of other communists? Why is it only Nazis? Why is it only right wing when the Nazi party is only the right wing of the Communist Party? Once you learn fascism and communism and liberalism and Nazism, they're all just brands of authoritarian left. The authoritarian right and Christian nationalism is centuries ago. Europe abandoned that centuries ago. Yet that's still not lived down. Yet communism? Nah, the left in America pretend they have a clean past, that they're different, that Antifa is different. You're not. Okay? You're hypocrites. And in most religions around the world, hypocrisy is the worst form of lying. It's the lowest crime in life. You know, it's the most simple crime. It's pride, it's arrogance, it's deception. But it's still a crime, right? It's still blasphemous. But that's why the left do it, because they want to prove how powerful they are. So I stood up to God. I'm the ultimate rebel. And they only do it because they want to get some girl to drool over them. And that's a fact, even when they don't want to admit it. So thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and please support the channel. You can support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, of which I have two. I have one for my writing and an RPG based on my writing. Buy my books, buy my merch. I always prefer you to buy my books, of course. Links are in the link tree description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. Please and thank you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.